In August 2025, Bryan Kohberger will stand trial for one of the most shocking crimes in recent American history: the brutal murder of 4 University of Idaho students in their sleep. The prosecution has spent over 2 years building their case, and the evidence they're about to present could send him to death row. Today, I'm going to walk you through every piece of evidence prosecutors will use in court: the DNA, the cell phone data, the eyewitness, the surveillance footage, and the items found in his apartment. This is the case prosecutors believe will prove Bryan Kohberger is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But first, you need to understand what happened that night in November 2022. November 13, 2022. Moscow, Idaho, a small college town with a population of just 25,000 people. The University of Idaho dominated life here. It was a safe place, a place where students felt comfortable walking home late at night. On this Saturday night, the University of Idaho students were enjoying their evening like any other weekend. Kaylee, Goncalves, 21 years old, and Madison, Mogen, also 21, went to a local bar called the Corner Club. They left around 1:30 a.m. Ethan Chapin, 20, and his girlfriend Xana, Kernodle, 20, attended a fraternity party on campus. They returned home around 1:45 a.m. All 4 lived at 1122 King Road, a 3-story rental house near campus. 2 other roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, also lived in the house. They were on the first floor. The 4 victims were on the second and third floors. By 2 a.m., all 6 roommates were home. The house was quiet. Everyone was going to sleep, but someone was watching. At approximately 4 a.m., a white Hyundai Elantra was captured on surveillance cameras driving through the neighborhood multiple times. The car circled the area. It passed the house on King Road. It left. It came back. At 4:04 a.m., the car was seen making a final pass. Then, between 4 o'clock and 4:25 a.m., 4 people were brutally murdered in their beds. The weapon was a large fixed-blade knife, later determined to be a crowbar-style combat knife with a 7-inch blade. The attack was swift, silent, and savage. Kaylee, Goncalves, and Madison, Mogen were killed in a 3rd-floor bedroom. They were sleeping in the same bed. Both were stabbed multiple times. The attack was so violent that some wounds went through to the mattress beneath them. On the 2nd floor, Xana, Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin were killed in Xana's bedroom. Ethan was likely killed first, as he may have woken up during the attack. Xana fought back. She had defensive wounds on her hands and arms. Her final moments were captured in a chilling detail revealed later. Her last act was using her phone, possibly trying to call for help. The coroner would later determine that all 4 victims died from multiple sharp force injuries. They bled out rapidly. Death was not instant for all of them, but it was inevitable. And throughout this horror, 2 roommates on the 1st floor survived. They heard nothing that would make them call 911 that night, or so they thought. Dylan Mortensen, one of the surviving roommates, would later tell police something that would become one of the most controversial elements of this case. She woke up around 4 a.m. to what she thought was Kaylee playing with her dog. She heard crying coming from Xana's room. She heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." Then Dylan opened her bedroom door. She saw a figure dressed in black clothing and a mask walking toward her. The figure walked past her toward the back sliding glass door. She described him as approximately 5 feet 10 inches or taller, not very muscular, but athletically built, with bushy eyebrows. She stood frozen in shock. The figure leapt through the sliding door, and Dylan, terrified and in shock, locked herself in her room. She did not call 911. This decision would haunt the investigation and spark intense debate. Why didn't she call police immediately? Was she truly in shock? Did she not realize what had happened? It wasn't until almost 8 hours later, at 11:58 a.m. on November 13th, that one of the surviving roommates called 911. The call reported an unconscious person. Responders arrived to find a scene of unimaginable horror. 4 young people, full of life and promise, were dead, and the killer was gone. The investigation that followed would become one of the most intense manhunts in recent American history. Moscow police, Idaho State Police, and FBI agents descended on the small town. They collected evidence. They interviewed hundreds of people. They reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage, and slowly, piece by piece, they built a case against a suspect no one had initially considered: Bryan Christopher Kohberger, a 28-year-old PhD student in criminology at Washington State University, just 15 minutes away from Moscow across the state border. On December 30th, 2022, 6 weeks after the murders, Bryan Kohberger was arrested at his parents' home in Pennsylvania. He had driven cross-country for the Christmas holiday. The arrest shocked many who knew him. He was a graduate student studying criminal justice. He had no prior violent criminal record. He seemed like an unlikely suspect for such a brutal crime. But prosecutors had evidence. Evidence they believed proved beyond a reasonable doubt that Bryan Kohberger committed these murders. Let's examine that evidence piece by piece. The first and perhaps most damning piece of evidence is DNA. During the investigation, crime scene technicians processed the house at 1122 King Road meticulously. They collected blood samples, fingerprints, hair, fibers, and any potential trace evidence. On the bed where Xana Kernodle was killed, investigators found a brown leather knife sheath. The sheath was empty. The murder weapon was gone, taken by the killer. But the sheath itself was a critical piece of evidence. The Kohberger knife sheath had a button snap closure. When investigators processed the sheath for DNA, they found male DNA on the button snap. This is called touch DNA, transferred when someone handles an object. The DNA profile was entered into CODIS, the FBI's national DNA database. There was no match to any known offender. But investigators didn't give up. They turned to forensic genetic genealogy, the same technique used to catch the Golden State Killer. They uploaded the DNA profile to public genealogy databases and began building family trees. This eventually led them to the Kohberger family. Once Bryan Kohberger was identified as a potential suspect through genealogy, investigators needed to confirm the DNA match directly. They conducted surveillance on Kohberger in Pennsylvania and collected DNA from trash he discarded. Their comparison was made. According to prosecutors, the DNA on the knife sheath is a statistical match to Bryan Kohberger. The probability of it belonging to someone else is infinitesimally small, approximately 1 in 5.37 octillion for Caucasians. This DNA evidence places Kohberger's sheath at the crime scene, in the room where Xana Kernodle was murdered. But DNA alone might not be enough. Kohberger's defense could argue contamination, though that would be difficult given where and how the DNA was found. Prosecutors needed more, and they had its cell phone data. Investigators obtained records for Bryan Kohberger's cell phone. These records showed the location of his phone based on which cell towers it connected to. This is called cell site location information, or CSL. The data revealed a disturbing pattern. In the months leading up to the murders, Bryan Kohberger's phone pinged cell towers near the King Road house at least 12 times. He had been in that area repeatedly, driving past the house, surveilling it. On the night of the murders, his phone data tells a chilling story. At 2:47 a.m. on November 13th, Kohberger's phone stopped reporting to cell towers. This typically means the phone was turned off or put in airplane mode. Prosecutors argue this was an intentional act to avoid creating a digital trail. His phone remained off for several hours, during the time when the murders occurred. Then, at 4:48 a.m., approximately 20 minutes after investigators believed the murders were completed, Kohberger's phone reconnected to cell towers and it was moving fast. The phone traveled south from Moscow, Idaho, back toward Pullman, Washington, where Kohberger lived. The route and timing are consistent with someone fleeing a crime scene. Later that same morning, around 9 a.m., Kohberger's phone pinged a cell tower near the King Road house again. Prosecutors believe he returned to the scene, possibly to see police response or to check if he had left evidence. This cell phone data creates a timeline that aligns perfectly with the murders. Phone off during the crime, phone on immediately after, returned to the scene hours later. But there's more. The white Hyundai Elantra seen on surveillance cameras circling the neighborhood. Bryan Kohberger owned a white 2015 Hyundai Elantra. Investigators reviewed thousands of hours of surveillance footage from cameras around Moscow. They tracked a white Elantra traveling from Pullman, Washington into Moscow, through the neighborhood where the victims lived, and then speeding away at high speed immediately after the murders. The car was seen making multiple passes near the King Road house between 3:29 a.m. and 4:04 a.m. Each pass took it closer to the house. At 4:04 a.m., the car made a final pass. 4 minutes later, at 4:08 a.m., the same car was seen leaving the area at high speed, running a stop sign. The car traveled back toward Pullman, the exact route Kohberger would have taken to his apartment. When police arrested Kohberger in Pennsylvania, they seized his white 2015 Hyundai Elantra. Forensic examination of the vehicle is ongoing, but prosecutors have indicated they found evidence inside the car. Those specific details remain sealed. Then there's the eyewitness, Dylan Mortensen, the surviving roommate who saw the figure in black leaving the house. Her description matches Bryan Kohberger's physical appearance: tall, athletic build, bushy eyebrows. While she did not identify him by name initially, prosecutors argue that her description, combined with all other evidence, points to Kohberger. The defense will likely attack this identification, noting that Dylan was traumatized, it was dark, and the figure wore a mask. But prosecutors will present it as one more piece in a comprehensive puzzle. After his arrest, investigators executed search warrants on Kohberger's apartment and his office at Washington State University. What they found has not been fully disclosed, but court documents reference several items of evidence collected. This likely includes electronics, clothing, possibly cleaning supplies, or other items relevant to the case. Investigators also searched for the murder weapon, the Kohberger knife. They have not announced finding it. Prosecutors believe Kohberger disposed of it, possibly during his cross-country drive to Pennsylvania or at some other location. The absence of the murder weapon is a weakness in the prosecution's case, but not a fatal one. Many murder convictions occur without the weapon ever being recovered. So, let's summarize the prosecution's case. 1. DNA on the knife sheath found at the murder scene matches Bryan Kohberger. 2. His cell phone data shows he was surveilling the house multiple times before the murders, turned his phone off during the crime, and returned to the scene afterward. 3. A white Hyundai Elantra matching his car was captured on surveillance, circling the house multiple times and fleeing at high speed immediately after the murders. For an eyewitness saw a figure matching Kohberger's description leaving the house immediately after the killings. 5. Physical evidence collected from his car and apartment, the details of which remain partially sealed. Individually, each piece might be challenged, but together, prosecutors argue they form an overwhelming web of evidence proving guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Bryan Kohberger has pleaded not guilty to all charges. He faces 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of burglary. Idaho is seeking the death penalty. His defense team, led by public defender Ann Taylor, is challenging the evidence on multiple fronts. They filed motions to suppress the genetic genealogy evidence, arguing it violated Kohberger's privacy rights. They've challenged the cell phone data as imprecise and open to interpretation. They've questioned the reliability of the eyewitness identification under traumatic circumstances. The defense has also suggested alternative theories, though specifics remain vague. They've implied that other suspects were not adequately investigated. They've raised questions about whether one person could have committed these murders in such a short time. The trial is set to begin in August 2025. It's expected to last several months. The prosecution will present their evidence methodically, building layer upon layer. The defense will attack each piece, looking for reasonable doubt. Jury selection will be critical. Finding impartial jurors in a case this high profile will be challenging. The trial may be moved to another location in Idaho to ensure fairness. Media coverage will be intense. Every day of testimony will be analyzed by legal experts, true crime commentators, and millions following the case online. The question that will dominate everything: did Bryan Kohberger commit these murders? The prosecution believes the evidence proves he did. The DNA places his sheath at the crime scene. The cell phone data puts him in the area at the time of the murders. The surveillance footage captured his car. The eyewitness saw someone matching his description. But the defense will ask, is it possible the DNA was planted or contaminated? Is the cell phone data precise enough to prove he was inside that house? Could the car on surveillance be someone else's Elantra? Can an eyewitness identification made under extreme trauma be trusted? These are the questions the jury will have to answer, for young lives were taken that night. Kaylee, Goncalves, Madison, Mogen, Xana, Kernodle, and Chapin. They deserve justice. Their families deserve answers. The trial in 2025 will determine whether Bryan Kohberger is responsible, whether the evidence is sufficient, whether justice will be served. We'll be covering this trial extensively as it unfolds. Subscribe to follow every development. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you think the evidence is strong enough for a conviction? Or are there too many unanswered questions? Thank you for watching. This case has gripped the nation for over 2 years. In 2025, we may finally get answers.